1 Samuel 22. We had to end sadly, but it's time and so forth. In the middle of a paragraph, well, in the middle of a story, really. And this is where Saul murders some priests. It's sad to think that there was such a lack of respect and there was such a hard drive by Saul for vengeance. One of the things that we've noticed last week, and we're going to notice it again this week, is that Saul has lost his mind. I mean, in many ways, you might say, well, he's an individual that might be considered a narcissist. I mean, he has to rein the people in, and part of the paragraph or the story that we're in the middle of, he basically tells the people, he says, you haven't done anything for me. You know, where am I? Where do I fit into your plans? Why haven't you lifted me up? Why haven't you been calling me great? Why haven't you been doing anything for me? And it's sad that a man gets to that point. I've seen an individual get to that point, and you may have as well. But nevertheless, Saul is at that point. And Abimelech answered the king. Maybe we should go back. Let's go back to verse 13. We have Ahimelech, who is defined in verse 11 as the priest, the son of Ahitub. Ahitub was, yes, the father of Ahimelech, but Ahimelech was the priest. Ahimelech, of course, is the one that helped David. And Saul says, I want you to hear it now, son of Ahitub. And he says, well, here am I. And Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword and have inquired of God for him that he should rise against me to lie in wait as it is this day? That's the question. Now, here's the answer that Ahimelech gives as to why he helped David. Ahimelech answered the king and said, and who among all your servants is as faithful as David? So he first of all says David is faithful. And from a standpoint of a priest looking at that and being able to say that, he says, you know, he's faithful. But his faithfulness that he's talking about here is probably not to God, but his faithfulness to Saul, the king. But who among your servants is as faithful as David? Second of all, who is the king's son-in-law? Remember, David married Saul's daughter. So he said, secondly, it's your son-in-law. Thirdly, who goes at your bidding? He does what you tell him to do. He has not backed down from serving you. He has not been one that is wanted to be served, but he has served. And is honorable in your house. He is well thought of. He's well spoken of. And then fifthly, he says, did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Here's the reason that I helped him. You know, he was a good man. He was a man that was in your service. He was a man that's even in your family. Here's a man that I even asked God concerning. And he says, far be it from me that not the king impute anything to his servant or to any in the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all this, little or much. The rift between Saul and David, he says, I didn't know this was going on. That's very possible. You know, sometimes if you don't ask, you don't know. I was talking to a preacher several years ago of a large congregation, and I said of something that was going on in his congregation because I knew it for a fact because I knew some of the folks. And he said, I know nothing about that. I said, how do you know nothing about that? And I said, I do. And he said, just don't. And I said, okay, brother. So as I went and questioned others, I found out I was even knew more than that. So nevertheless, he might not have known. He might not have asked. It was not his affair, and maybe it was not his concern. And there's a possibility that David and Saul had pretty much kept this rift quiet for the most part. And the king said, You surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, remember, kings sometimes rode in chariots. And as they rode in chariots, there would be those that we would call runners that would run ahead of them, and some would even run behind, but run ahead of them and make sure that the path was clear and that everything was all right. And if they weren't riding in a chariot, then if they were walking, then they did the same thing. They ran ahead. And so that's, I think, probably who he's talking about when he talks about the guards who stood about him. Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me. The vengeance that Saul had against David was so down and out. It had become so ingrained in Saul that he was willing to kill the priest, and he's willing to kill all those that were around about. Let's wipe them all out. Let's take care of all of them. The vengeance had eaten on him so that he had now really, in many sense, the way I look at it, and maybe not correctly so that you can just say this is Paul Daugherty's interpretation, the vengeance had become such that he had no reverence for anything. He was only wanting what he wanted for himself. But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Lord. They still had respect for these priests. They're men of God. They're messengers of God. If you were reading and you looked in Malachi as I was talking a while ago, you notice that it says in verse 8, it talks about the priest as being messengers of God. These messengers of God, these servants, these warriors, these men that were serving in Saul's cabinet, for lack of a better term, or even in his house, they didn't want to kill the priest. And so the king said to Doeg, and Doeg, if you remember from last week, Doeg was defined as the individual that was Saul's head servant, if you will. He was over all of the servants. And so the king said to Doeg, you turn and kill the priest. So Doeg, the Edomite, turned and struck. The Hebrew there for the word struck, that the New King James translates as struck, the Hebrew word is attack. He attacked the priest, and he killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. So he killed 85 priests. Also Nob, the city of priests, he struck with the edge of the sword, both men and women and children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys and sheep with the edge of the sword. I mean, this is brutal. This is brutal. Now, things have changed and times have changed, but preachers, if you will, have not so much in the last quite a few years, but for a long period of time, they were a respected class of people. Well, think about in the Old Testament, the way you respected certain ones. The priesthood was definitely most respected, but Doeg has no seemingly qualms about taking care of the priesthood because Saul had told him to. And so he kills at least 85, and evidently more as he goes to Nob in verse 19. And he goes and he finds more priests and he kills them and kills even the women, the children, and even the nursing infants. Now, one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priest. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. But with me you shall be safe. The guilt by association was what had happened to, if you will, the priest and the priest in Nob. And now when David finds out from Ahimelech, from Abiathar, when David finds out from Abiathar that Doeg, through a command of Saul, has killed the priest, David feels guilty. I've led him to these people. I've led him to these are individuals. Through my association with Ahimelech, I've led him to these priests, and he consequently has killed him. So David feels guilt for what has happened. David didn't do it. David really, like I say, just because of his closeness and because Abiathar had helped him, Saul was willing to wipe out everybody and everything. Guilt by association almost. Let's just take everybody out that's helped David. And so David feels this guilt. But David, notice that he tells Abiathar, he says, stay with me. Do not fear. Now, that fear could have been a couple of reasons. Fear could have been because of what Saul might do to him, because he has escaped. He being Ahimelech's son, he would have been of priesthood. So he would have been afraid that Saul's coming after him. Saul's coming after David. The end of what has happened. But David says, don't fear, but the one that seeks my life seeks your life. So he tells him, Saul's after all of us. But he says, with me, you'll be safe. Now, one of the things that's fascinating as we get into the next chapter or so, the next couple of chapters really, is the fact that David, we see it, David moves around. David has some 600 men, 600 fighting men that are with him. And David goes from here to there to yon. Now, if you look at a map, he doesn't necessarily travel great mileage or great distances. But what he does do is he goes into some great hiding places. He goes into the cliffs. He doesn't just stay out in the plains and in the flat land. He goes up into the cliffs and he goes down and he moves around. And so he's constantly running from Saul. And remember, what has he done? Well, from Saul's vantage point, he has shamed him. He's made him look bad. From David's vantage point, all I've done is I went out. I wanted to take supplies to my brother, Saul the giant. No one of my countrymen would stand up against the giant, and so I did, and I killed him. That's all I did. I really trying to help my country, trying to help my brothers, and trying to help my people. I've done nothing. I'm innocent. But Saul says, well, you've shamed me. And so Saul is pursuing constantly after David. And when he hears that David is one place, he goes, as we saw last week, and we'll see here maybe in just a few minutes if we get to it. And then he hears and he goes, and he hears and he goes. He is obsessed with the idea of vengeance. It reminds us really of the ugliness of vengeance, the ugliness of folks that try to revenge the misdeeds or even the deeds of another. Romans chapter 12 addresses that with regards to, remember, basically Paul says, do good to those that don't do good to you. And he says, if you do it, he says, you'll be better off. And I got to thinking, there are some instances in the Bible of individuals that had something bad done to them, but yet they turned around and did good. Think about Joseph. Think about Esau. Think about David here. Think about Moses in the book of Numbers. Think about Jesus. And 1 Peter 2 kind of clears that up for us. Make sure Jesus, of course, didn't. Stephen, Acts 7, didn't. These folks did nothing or good, even though evil was being done to them. Vengeance was not part of what they wanted to be about. We'll let God handle that. We'll let God settle that. And so as they consider that, David was really probably not, it doesn't seem, and once again, this is Paul Daugherty's interpretation, David doesn't seem befuddled by this, at least at this point in time. Now, we'll see a little bit later on some things. But David is running, a man on the run for no reason. Being separated from family, being separated from friends, being separated from loved ones, being separated from his countrymen. And so David will turn, I think, in some ways to a hard fighting man. We'll see this when we get into the 30th chapter. But at the same time, too, David is just simply the innocent party feeling the wrath of the vengeance of a man that I think has some issues. I think has some mental issues. Maybe it was the vengeance that was driving him. I don't know. But it just seems as if there are some problems with Saul. Something somebody would like to say or to add. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
After you take care of the external enemies, Jonathan, be on the inside of this.
Yeah.
Take care of the internal, and even Jonathan can't get it to see reason.
No, that's right. Yeah. And you don't know, what they were doing, what they were trying. Jonathan will pledge here, what, 24th chapter? Jonathan will pledge again his allegiance to David. Yeah. And they couldn't. That's why I try to give Saul the benefit of the doubt and say there is more than vengeance here. There's a mental problem, I think. And so, yeah.
Back in chapter 2, we read about Eli, saying that none of his people would live to be old age. Did this kind of bring that prophecy to fill it in a sense, or just curious? I remember reading that back.
Yeah, you did. I don't know that I've ever put those two together, but it could be. Mm-hmm. Mm-mm. Yeah, it could be. I'm not saying that there wasn't, because it could, could be. Could be. I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't put the two and two together. Need to do that. Okay. Back about 39 years ago, I had a graduate class on this book. 39 years ago. I've studied it since then, don't get me wrong. But, yeah. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. Anything else? That's good. Well, David saves the city of Keilah. Keilah, by the way, don't Google Keilah. If you do, be careful, because there's a young lady that's Keilah something, and at least she's clothed. When I Googled, it popped up. It was like, no, I'm looking for a city in Judah, and but Keilah is in south. It's south of Bethlehem. Bethlehem's, of course, in Judah. Judah is not right in the middle of Israel. It's kind of just below, just south of the middle. And so that's about where Bethlehem is. And so that's where David is going. They told David, saying, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are robbing the threshing floors. It's probably, some estimate it's midsummer. And we have difficulty fixing the timeline and fixing true routes. I told you David is here, there, and yonder, and he is. But from a standpoint of where is he exactly, and as the time lapses, that things happen that we don't know, did he move, and so forth and so on. So, but from what we can tell, David is constantly on the move. And it seems strange, excuse me, that the Philistines have come to fight, especially Keilah, to fight in this area and to try to rob the threshing floors. But some have said, well, there may have been a reason for that. Well, yeah, there probably was. But what was the reason? No one really knows. Some have said, well, possibly they needed food and they needed grain, and that makes sense. Some said that they thought maybe that the Philistines had really hoped to bring the Judeans kind of under submission and under their leadership and their being over them, their dictatorship. And so this is the reason. We don't know. It's interesting, if you will, that David hears of his family or his children, his nation being attacked. Now, think about this. The Philistines, their area, their land would have been south of Israel, and also they went up the coast a little bit on the west side. But this would have been a vulnerable place from the standpoint of you don't go over, you can't just lead an army of walking soldiers over into the middle of a country and then start fighting. So you have to start somewhere. And so it makes sense that since Keilah is south, that this would be one of the places that you would attack. But David just, okay, let's go. Now, admittedly, David, because he's on the run, family's not there. He's not having to worry about family. He's not having to worry about job and leaving his job or whatever. He's on the run. And he can go wherever he wants to. So he's going to go and save his country, if you will. Therefore, David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, look, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Exactly what they're afraid of, we don't know. Are they afraid of the Philistines? Are they afraid of leaving where they are because Saul is after them? I don't know. And I don't know anybody that knows because the text doesn't say. It just says we're afraid. It doesn't seem to me that they were afraid of fighting. David's men went and fought different places, different folks, if you will. And so their fear might have been, this is somewhere where we might end up losing. And so is it really worth it? Do we really need to go? So David inquired of the Lord once again. And the Lord answered him and said, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, struck them with a mighty blow, and took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. So David is once again a victor, once again a hero for the children of Israel, for his people. He's able to win. He's able to win the battle and thus send the Philistines on their way. To leave, to go away. Notice, though, that David inquires the Lord twice, and notice twice the Lord answers him. The Lord does not answer us, as we know, directly. He does answer our prayers. He doesn't answer us directly as he answered David in this instance. David wants to know, Lord, what do you want me to do? And it's a great reminder for us that as we move through life, Lord, what do you want me to do? Is not a bad question, a wrong question to ask God, even in our prayers. Lord, what do you want to have? Lead me in the way that you want to lead me. What do you want me to do? And when, of course, the Lord answered and told them, said, well, go fight. Well, they did. And so they struck, of course, the Philistines and sent them away. Now it happened, verse 6, that when Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, that he went down with an ephod in his hand. Garment of priest, makes sense. Saul was told that David was gone to Keilah. So Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. So Saul called people together to war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. And there's a couple of things I want to notice here, and want to say, and don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or anything, because of the way I understand something. But notice, first of all, that when Saul got word of where David was, he's ready to go. He's ready to go. We're going to take him. Here he is. Okay, I'm ready to go. Notice, though, that he has what I would perceive as a misconceived idea. God has delivered David into my hands. It's very hard to distinguish in this day and age God and what he does for us. Now, not denying, I mean, just recently, I'm talking about maybe last week, I went through my life and just times in my life where really things worked out. And some of them, is not exactly what I wanted, but man, that worked out. And I see where that was better than what, I thought I wanted. And I can say, I believe I can say, God, the hand of God. But from a standpoint of not having a divine, what's called in theological circles, divine interpreter. In other words, God saying, yeah, that was me. That wasn't just, your life taking its natural course. That was me. That was me intervening. That was me working it all out, Romans 8, verse 28. We can't really say that. We can, I believe, truly believe it, because God does work. God is at work. But, sometimes people attribute things to God that, do you really think God would have put David, who he has anointed already as his next king, in the path of Saul so that Saul could go and kill him? No, but that was Saul's belief. I was listening to the radio not long ago, and this girl was talking about a house that she bought. She was looking for a house, and she bought a house. And the reason she bought a house is because when she came out of the house, now the house was a little bit too rich for her, what she really planned on spending, but nevertheless, when she came out of the house, there was a bluebird, and she believed that bluebird was her mother saying, buy this house. I don't think so. I was reading on Facebook of a friend of mine just here a few days ago that talked about that she had gone to the cemetery. Her mother and father, it was their anniversary, and she'd gone to the cemetery and she'd laid flowers on their grave. And this is what she said, and I'm quoting what she said. She said, and it began to sprinkle while I was there, and I just took that as a sign from Mama that was her tears crying from the fact that she and Daddy were together again. It could be that it was raining. And I don't mean that flippantly. We take things, and I don't mean to alienate anybody, but I think we need to be careful, because sometimes there are things that we say, well, this was God, and then as it turns out rotten. And so then there's folks that are in our lives that heard us say, well, that was God. And when they see it turn out rotten, then they begin to think God's rotten. So because we don't have that divine interpreter to tell us, we don't know for sure what is the hand of God and what is not. Once again, I want to be plain in this and say, I believe in the providence of God. I believe God is at work today. That's why I pray. That's why I ask. That's why, but at the same time, too, I think we need to be careful. Saul said, oh, God has delivered him to my hand. But also, oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no,
Can't be the person if you think it's God or not. If you think God worked out things in your life, if I say I think God did this for me, can't be the person to say, oh, I don't think you're probably
right.
like nobody can. And I'm not saying you
No.
none of us can.
Right.
Because I got an aunt. She said, oh, that's the Lord working. And it'd be something, like gas was on sale or something.
Yeah.
I don't see that.
Right.
I just don't say it.
No, 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 no. If the lady had been in my presence about the cemetery, I would have just let it go. Yeah, no, you don't. The one thing you don't do is you don't pop anybody's face. Huh?
It's the
Yeah.
we say that, absolutely say that God cured somebody's cancer.
Yeah.
But we don't believe in miracles. That would have to be a miracle.
It's the way that it's done, so therefore not a miracle.
But God did it. If you had cancer and suddenly you didn't, they said this tumor's gone tomorrow. Don't seem like a different miracle than turning water into wine to me. That's supernatural. That's unheard of, and maybe they were mistaken the first time, but it's pretty strange, I think.
Life does. Life does. Yeah. And we have to be careful. I would not go around pop anybody's bubble, so to speak. I would not question anybody's faith. I can't prove it. Yeah. Can't prove it. That's right. Yeah. Understand a miracle. A miracle is that which is superhuman, that which cannot be done with human hands. Then you have to ask yourself, do miracles exist today? And if they do, and we'll go back to 1 Corinthians 12, and which ones are we going to pick that are still there or not? That's your logical problem. Yeah, things happen, and I can't explain them. I can't. Yeah.
That could or could not happen to you. Not a lot more now, and you know we have heat,
Yeah.
right? Likely that your immune system could attack a tumor and it could do it. That's not necessarily God did, it could be your body did.
Yeah. And we have heat, not in the building here at church, but yeah, we do have it. God's will, yeah. James 4. God's will. Mhm.
Oh, we can't explain.
Right.
I can't explain.
Right.
I know it happened,
Right.
but when it comes to miracles, I'm looking for the person that miracle. That's what you find in the
Right.
church. Ability for someone like Steve walk up and be a faith healer.
Yeah.
Okay? Difference between miracles
Sure.
and miraculous.
Sure.
Things are not, that we can't explain.
There are plenty of things we can't understand or explain, but Right. Anything else? All good.
That bad, just like I have bad, but, and I think we agree on that, but what about the people that are Christians? Or this guy, do you see a question there?
No, no. No, I didn't say a question. Sorry.
I said,
Sure. God loves everyone. Yeah. Right. Right. God is still using, say, other individuals to influence them, hopefully for good, to get them to turn around. The reality of it is that while God's ideal will is that all men will be saved, God's circumstantial will is that He knows not everyone will be saved because not everyone will do what they're supposed to do. Doesn't mean that He doesn't love them. Doesn't love what they do. Kind of interesting if you go back and think about. Uh, I think a lot about Proverbs chapter 6, where it says 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are abomination unto Him. It's not people; it's what they do.
so that's something we can't answer, but
Right.
what do you tell somebody like that? Cause if you was trying to tell them that that wasn't so there, then, you'd lose a friend if that was a friend.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't tell them.
And that's kind of, I know
Yeah,
because of never go back to something like that.
yeah. First of all, I would never tell them, you know, what you did was right or wrong from that standpoint. Praying for a, a loved one that's sick. Uh, you never know. I mean, you never know who else was praying for them that was righteous, maybe as well. You don't know whose prayer God answered, but what you do know is God answers prayers, and He answers them the way that is best for the individuals that ask for them. And so, if someone were to say, I prayed and they were all right, I would just say, well, good, because for me and to me to throw somebody's faith underneath the bus, so to speak. Yeah, yeah, right. Because to throw their faith underneath the bus, I don't think I'm going to get anywhere with them. I think I'm going to alienate them. And so I don't want to mislead them, and I don't think my answer is misleading them. But I don't, at the same time too, I don't want to uh, injure, like you said, the relationship, and I don't want to injure them in their faith. And what I want to do then is to hopefully construct a discussion to understand that what we need to be sure is if we're following what the Bible says. Mhm.
Calvin, and they're telling about how, miraculous things happen over and over. And it just, wonder how many people just eat that stuff up. And all at the same time, send us money. Send us money, they do that. And then they go right to sending money.
Mm.
And, but people must just eat that stuff up. And then you wonder if that's not where the people are that, was in church one time.
Yeah. When people have things happen to them, it's been my experience, it's almost not near to impossible to explain what it is and that they may have not done it or had it happen. There are things that happen that I can't explain. That you can let go one of two ways. You can let it be such that it says, see, I don't need faith in God. I was reading, because of my algorithms, I guess, one of the main pages that I go back to is Microsoft to see the news. And so if I look at some religious stuff through the website, then the algorithms end up kicking me up lists. And I got a list the other day, which I found interesting, and it was 16 or 17 reasons why people don't believe the Bible, don't believe God. And one of those really was, strange things happen to me and I'm not a Christian, so therefore I don't have to be. That was the conclusion. That was one of the arguments. What I do need to be sure of is that I don't let it lead me from faith, but let it lead me to faith, to trust God, that this is where it came from. And that's what's key, I think. So, anything else? All right, well, let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day. We're thankful for the opportunity that we've had to study your word, for the fact that it is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. We find there your word, and we find there the revelation not only of just of you, but of what you would have us to be and do. And we ask that we'll constantly search the scriptures and study them in order to find out what is true and right in your sight. Help us to then live that life and to be the people that you would have us to be. We ask that you be with those that were announced a while ago that are sick and those that are going through times of grief. We're thankful for others, Jim able to be out, and others that are doing well, and we ask that you be with them as well. Watch over us, bless us, and keep us and hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Y'all have a great week. Thank y'all.